Okay, so welcome everyone. This is CyberWise's third online chat. And today I'm really excited because we're going to address a problem, or not a problem, but a question that we get a lot from parents and teachers. And that is, how can I gain some control over what my kids are doing online? And we live in such an exciting time because it's super overwhelming, but it's also very empowering because there's a lot of tools that can help parents, especially, have control or at least know what their kids are doing online. Of course, the best tool of all is the tool of conversation, and we always encourage that. But in addition to that, sometimes we need a little extra help. So to help us today, we have three guests that I'm very excited about. The first to my, and I get so confused here because on my screen, she's to my right. She's right here. And that's Janelle from Frenity. And right below her, we have Brittany from Kids Email. And below that, we have Melissa, who just wrote a book that's really great called Identity Crises. So I don't want you to hear about them from me. I'm going to go around the room here and have everyone introduce themselves and tell you a little story about why they do what they do. And I'm going to start with you, Janelle.
Okay, thanks, Diana. This is fun. I'm so excited to be here with all of you guys. So like Diana said, I'm Janelle. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Frenity, which is the first private group networking application that's suitable for users of all ages. So we went an extra mile on this and decided that we needed to create a platform that offered both privacy for groups as well as a way for parents to onboard their kids onto social media safely and under their terms. So that's what Frenity is all about. It is what we believe to be the next generation of social media. It's targeted at adults, but it is compliant with the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act. So it does allow parents to have a way to onboard their kids to social media in a safe spot.
Terrific. Thank you, Janelle. And right below Janelle, we have Brittany from Kids Email. How are you, Brittany?
Good. Thanks for having me. So my name is Brittany. I am the woman behind the scenes, I guess, here at Kids Email. And what Kids Email is a safe email service for children. And so it is what it says. We have an app and website available that allows children to communicate in a safe environment. And we actually started our company with a safe browser for kids called My Kids Browser back in 2009. And we had a lot of parents ask us how their kids could communicate online safely. And so because of this, the idea of Kids Email was born, and now we're just rolling with it. So that's me and that's us.
The great product. I want you to talk a little bit more about it later because you never give it enough service. It's a really great product. And below me is Melissa Shore, who wrote a new book. I keep holding it up. I'm going to do it again. Called Identity Crises. And Melissa, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Right. So I'm Melissa Shore. I'm a young adult author. This is my second novel, and it's called Identity Crisis. And basically, this book takes on the whole issue of cyberbullying and catfishing for teenage girls. I guess I would say I wrote this book basically because I have two daughters and this is in their future. And as a mother, I was terrified reading stories after stories of our children who had been cyberbullied and, in worst case scenarios, even being driven to take their own lives. And I really wanted to sort of understand what was behind that and what would motivate somebody to be the bully. So I wrote a book from both perspectives, both from the victim and the cyberbully, looking at each and hoping that it'll allow kids to really understand both sides of the issue.
I'm so glad that you did that from both sides because that's so important. I teach cyber civics in school, and kids are always fascinated to find out what makes a cyberbully bully. And when they really think about it and talk about it, they realize that it comes from a place of hurt, and it makes them want to be empathetic to the perpetrator of cyberbullying. So I think that's really important to look at both sides. And actually, I wanted to start with you today, and maybe you could take a few minutes and just tell us why you think it's so important for parents to stay involved in their children's digital lives.
Well, I feel like there's so much that is going on out there. And, as a parent, I think our worst scenario is always, the predator coming into our children's lives online. And that is definitely something to fear and something to be aware of and talk to your children about. But I also think that, teenagers especially can be doing so much damage to each other emotionally online. And, whether it's bullying or catfishing, which is basically pretending they are someone they're not, there are ways that they can really do a lot of hurt to each other. And so I think as parents, a lot of the times we're out of control and we feel like there's nothing we can do when we see these things going on other than have our kids talk to our kids about it. But I think a lot of times teenagers are also probably tired of getting lectured, and I feel like putting a novel in their hands where they could really read it, go off, read it on their own, think about it, and then come back to those conclusions might be a great tool for parents.
You bring up a good point that parents feel like they don't have control, and that's really why we're gathered here today. And one of the things that Janelle actually shared with me at the beginning of the year is one of the hot digital trends that was identified for 2016 was this idea of private social networking. And, I think a lot of parents don't know what that means or what that is. And so, Janelle, maybe you could take a minute to explain that.
Sure. I think what's happened, so towards the end of 2015, there was a lot of press and a lot of articles from venture capitalists and from Social Media Examiner and some of those, that the next wave in social media was going to be, instead of everything being so public and out there, there was going to be a wave towards more intimacy and sharing in smaller private groups of people that you actually know, to Melissa's point about catfishing. And the prediction was that the next generation of social media to really take hold will be something that's focused on group private communication as well as messaging apps. So I think that that's the direction that we're starting to see people going. Quite simply, it's because we've lived in a social media era now for 10 years as when it essentially began, if you will, and it's become ubiquitous, and we are so accustomed. Everyone has become accustomed in the last 10 years to oversharing and putting their entire lives online. And now people are starting to pull back from that and say, wait a minute, it's not as important to me anymore to have 1,000 likes on a picture or for everybody that I don't even know to see these photos that I'm sharing. And they're starting to value their privacy a little bit more and understand that there are certain things about their lives and certain areas of their lives that we don't want to invite just everybody into, that we want to keep those a little bit more sacred and to communicate those things just with people that we want to see and invite into those parts of our lives.
Right. That's a good point. And that's a really why a lot of kids gravitate towards Snapchat, because it's a place where they can communicate privately with their friends. But parents aren't so crazy about it because that means we can't see what they're doing, especially when they're younger and they're just getting started using platforms like that. So that's what I love about Frenity, because kids can still be social networking, but it's a place where you can be involved too, and it's safe. It's not put out there for the whole world to see.
Right.
I like that a lot also about kids' email. And Brittany, I really want you to talk a little bit about that, like how you provide these walled safe spaces for even younger kids that should, I think, be learning how to use email first before they go on to social networking platforms. So maybe you can explain how that works.
Okay. Yeah. So with kids' email, we have a lot of safety features in place to help, like you said, keep kids walled or safe using technology. So we have a couple of features available that you can choose who your child can contact, and you can also choose who can contact them. So that way the things like catfishing aren't an issue because you know exactly the communication that's going online. We have some parents that want to see what's going on, what messages are coming in and out. So you can turn that as a feature on as well. And then we have the others that are just content letting them know that, we have the safety features in place and not needing to know every little detail of conversation that's going on, but we do have that available. So it's kind of cool that you can still stay in the loop and the kids can stay in the loop and communicate safely, and you know that your children's not going to see anything appropriate or have anybody inappropriate contact them. So.
Yeah, I talk to so many parents and kids about emailing because I work with middle schoolers, and I'm always surprised. Number one, maybe they don't have an email address, or if they have one, it's really a ridiculous address. But more importantly is they don't know how to compose a proper email. And that's a big problem when they get to high school, or especially when they start applying for jobs, because eventually they're going to have to communicate like a human being with email. And so I just think it's like training wheels for kids and parents to start on something safe with kids' email, because not only is it safe, but it's a great way to learn how to communicate appropriately. So I talked about you guys a lot.
We appreciate that.
Okay, the other thing I talked about a lot yesterday was catfishing with the kids. And I hope that I gave it a fair representation. I heard a lot from them what it was. But Melissa, maybe you could, for people who don't know, maybe you can explain catfishing and how common it is and how often kids might do it.
Sure. So the word catfishing actually came back a bunch of years ago, about 2010, there was a documentary by a man who was having an online relationship with a woman who he thought was one thing. He eventually grew suspicious and he went to meet her in person and discovered she was completely different. And he brought along his documentary team and filmed the whole encounter. And at the end of it, the woman turned out to be married. And he was interviewing the husband, and he, sort of asked the husband what he thought of it. And the husband's response was basically that his wife's actions were sort of like catfish. When you throw them in a net, they keep the other fish on their toes. They keep them lively. And he basically was sort of defending his wife's actions, saying there's some of us out here in the world who are just, tricky and keep us on their toes just like a catfish. And that's where the term began. And they named the documentary Catfish, and then it spun off into an MTV show.
Oh,
and so that's where we get it from. And what I found from looking at this for teens is that it's really fascinating. There's catfishing is being used in so many different ways online. I've heard of stories where teens are using it and they're choosing an identity, the opposite gender of their own, maybe because they're experimenting with their gender a little bit. I've heard stories of teens using it to make a crush jealous, which was actually the case with that Rolling Stone story with the woman on the UVA campus that became quite well known because it was a fake story. It turned out that she was catfishing because she made up a fake identity to make her crush jealous. So that's sort of not uncommon. And a lot of times I think teens have told me they just create a new identity because they want to be not themselves, not who they are in real life, but someone more popular, somebody completely different, and they try to create a fake identity online for that reason.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you talk about that too, because I think, our minds as adults tend to go to the negative so fast. And we forget that a lot of times kids are trying out different identities, because learning about your identity is a very primal, important thing to do as a young adolescent. And social media, sometimes it gives them a chance to try that out in a space where they're not going to be, shunned by their peers or made fun of. So I'm glad you talked about that, because I think it's really important for parents to remember that sometimes there's positive aspects to this stuff as well as the negative aspects. So, and Janelle, I was curious, could something like catfishing ever happen on Frenity?
No, we're really designed to not be able to do something like that. So I can understand how it happens on public social media, and you're connecting with strangers a lot of the time on public social media. But again, we're completely private. So inside Frenity, you're prompted to create your own group, and you can't find groups to join. It does you no good on Frenity whatsoever to pretend to be somebody that you're not, because you're inviting people to groups, and they're people that you know, or you're being invited to a group by someone that you know. So there's no logical reason that you would ever gain anything from catfishing in a platform like Frenity. But I can understand how it happens and why it happens in public social media platforms. There's a lot of experimentation you can do because there's more access to strangers, and quite simply, you're really getting access to strangers inside Frenity.
Right. And Brittany, I think you addressed this already, but catfishing or anything like that couldn't really happen on kids' email, could it?
It shouldn't, no. And if parents use the proper safety settings, which I think is key with a lot of different tools, including kids' email, it should never be a concern. And I guess that's the beauty of having tools in place, knowing that that's not something that's going to happen to your children. So.
Right. And Melissa, one thing I haven't asked you about your book is what ages are appropriate to read it? What would you recommend it for?
I would say, because it's a overall very clean book, it's really a book that is geared towards girls who truly are reading YA. I'd say 12 and 13 and up would be okay. It's not necessarily a crossover book where an adult would be reading it because it's got a lot of violence and sex and things like that. It's I'd say more geared for the younger range of YA, which is hard to find. You don't see a lot written for that category.
Yeah, you're right. Having had girls that just left that age group, I know what you mean. And then, Brittany, what ages do you recommend for kids' email?
We're finding that kids actually start using kids' email as young as 5, which is it's a good training tool to learn how to use technology. I would say 5 to 13 is usually about the ages they're using us. And it's used mostly as a training tool to introduce them into technology. So, really just when they have that need to contact with family and friends. Sometimes people have family overseas or parents that travel. So I think the younger kids are being introduced for a way to communicate. And I probably think everyone sees that. The age is getting younger and younger. So
yeah, I know a lot of parents adults that should probably be on Kids Email too.
I think we all do.
Janelle, what about you? Like, it's interesting for me to watch Frenity because you've really expanded into other age groups and also into other like sororities and other demographics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what's really interesting for us is when we first launched, our first thought was this is the perfect training grounds for parents to introduce their kids to social media on their terms and when they're ready. Because if I'm a parent of a child who's under 13, I set up a sub-account for that child. And then by virtue of how we're designed, I'm in every group that child creates. So I can coach the process and have those conversations and see everything that they're doing. So our first idea was, how cool would it be if the first time that your child starts asking for Instagram or Twitter or Snapchat, you say, hold on, wait a minute, before I'm ready to unleash you to the public, let's really understand how to be appropriate and how to use social media productively. So, but what's happened is, because of kind of what we started talking about with private social media, we really targeted at adults, so we are happy to play it. And what we found is there are a lot of young adults who've grown up with social media and have all of a sudden realized that employers and recruiters and college admissions officers are looking constantly at their social media profiles. So they're starting to understand, oh my gosh, I need to make sure that I've got a super pristine public profile. So I'm going to put everything else that's maybe interesting or a little bit more private about my life into the appropriate groups in Frenity, so that when that employer does look at me online, they see what I want them to see versus my entire life of oversharing. So we've really started to expand into the collegiate market a lot lately, because that tends to be the age group that really is starting to move back towards a private social media pendulum.
Right. And, I just noticed that Jack McCartney has a question for both you, Janelle, and Brittany. And he asks, how does your platform prep kids and parents for the transition to the unencumbered mail and social media world? Good question. Do you want to try that, Brittany?
Sure.
Do you want to think about it?
I think maybe it's best for us to introduce our kids to technology in a safe environment. And yes, I get emails now, so unencumbered mail I can relate to. The spam is awful. Some of the messages I get are just things that I don't want to see and really don't care to have in my inbox. So I think being able to introduce children and say, these are the things that could happen, but right now you're protected. And I think as they get more and more exposed to the technologies that are out there, I just think that children just naturally seem to get it. They know what's dangerous. But personally, I would rather be in a safe environment first and unleashed instead of just unleashed into the world and think that everything's bad and crazy and that I can't do anything. So I don't know if that kind of answers your questions. Janelle, thoughts on that?
I think that just like as parents, we teach our kids how to say please and thank you. We teach our kids how to be polite, and social media has changed. We're the first generation of parents really trying to kind of navigate those waters. But I think that we also have to teach our kids what's appropriate on social media and who it's okay to talk to and what types of things are okay to post, what types of things are okay to repost. And I think that as a parent, until you're completely confident that your child is going to be productive online and have a really positive digital footprint, you need to be in control of that. And Frenity is designed for exactly that, for you to onboard your kids so that under your wings and under your guidance, you can respond, you can have the conversations, and you can show them that was a really nice comment that you made on so-and-so's post, or maybe not be uploading these kinds of pictures. And you can delete those things. It's a safe place. So it's not anything that they put into a Frenity group is not going to show up in Google to haunt them down the road when employers or colleges are looking at them. So it really gives parents complete control up until they're 13 or until the parent decides that they want to let them go off on their own. So it really gives parents a coaching opportunity more than anything else.
Right. I want to give like a shameless promotion here because I feel like I have a great job because I get to teach kids how to make that transition from the safe places like Kids Email and Frenity into the real online world where there are no safety nets. And I do that through a 3-year program called Cyber Civics, where we talk about all this stuff in classroom with friends. We practice it. We make mistakes together. We talk about our mistakes. We talk about privacy and how to maintain privacy. And it's super important. It's super empowering. And I can tell you those kids leave this 3-year program and they know how to, number one, watch out for each other, but number two, and more importantly, watch out for one another, themselves and one another. And so it's just super powerful. It's super important that we provide kids with these skills because, as Jack, so well brought up, it is a big, bad world out there and good world, but there's a lot of things for all of us to know on how to be a very proactive, positive digital citizen. So, if it's not cyber civics, make sure your kids are learning something, because to throw them into the pool without swimming lessons is just not the way to go. All right. I'm going to step off my soapbox now and go down to you, Melissa, because I'm really curious to find out how you did research for your book. I know you mentioned you had kids. Did you just dive into their online worlds and find out from them? Or
I'm also going back to the previous question. I mean, I want to chime in as a parent. So I have, like I said, my kids are barreling down the highway towards this, but my oldest is 10 and she is already asking me for an Instagram account. And so I guess my first insight is push her off as long as possible and keep delaying if I can to get to that point where I feel she's comfortable with it. And then the other thing that we've been doing is, everything she's a member of at this point, her email, is really shared through my account. So I see any kind of interaction she has online, it all comes through me. And I always make sure she knows to come to me if there's a website she's poking around on and they're asking her, sign in, give your name. She knows to come right to me and get permission and make sure what the information they're asking for is okay with me. And I guess I can just only hope that if we start off as a team, eventually she will have to be put out on her own, but I hope that I can delay that as long as possible and also teach her as we go together as partners for now.
Those are great points. And I just noticed that we have our friends from the Digital Citizenship Summit online. Hi, you guys. And I wanted to say that, so I love the work they're doing to promote digital citizenship. And they had a summit yesterday with, I think, 400 plus kids actually talking about digital citizenship in Blab. And what really struck me is something I read or heard, that kids felt like there weren't enough safety nets or control. And I see David's online, and if I'm not saying this correctly, maybe you can write it in the text. But the kids felt like they wanted their parents to help them have more safety nets or control online. And, I have to say that I hear that too from kids. They feel like, gosh, where's my mom? How come she doesn't care what I do online? And I wish that she would look. I wish that she would like. My own daughter as a young teenager would come home and say, you didn't like my picture on Instagram. And wow, that's so cool that they want my input even in their online life. But I think it's because I was there from the very beginning. I didn't just pop in at 16 to lurk and find out about the bad things. I was there for the good things too. And I think that's super important. So anyway, so I don't see that. Oh, here we go. David, thank you. He says, exactly. Many of them wanted more guidance. They wanted some sense of structure. That's coming from children. That's what they want in the online world. So that's why it's so great that we have these products like your guys' Frenity and Kids Email provides that structure that kids actually want. I think that's super important. So, Melissa, I wanted to go back to you again to tell me a little bit more about how you did the research for your book and what jumped out at you that you learned about kids in their online world that really surprised you.
Well, the research was, it's fun to be a YA writer because your job can be to basically go to the mall and spy on teenagers. So that's always a fun perk. But for this book, it was quite sad because a lot of this book was looking at cases of cyberbullying, and I started off actually inspired by the case. The first really high-profile case of catfishing that came out was that Notre Dame football player, Manti Te'o. And I think a lot of people really remembered that story and what happened to him and how he had thought he had a girlfriend who was dying, and then it turned out the whole thing was an elaborate scam. And that was really the first story that I think got me started on this book. And and led me down the path to researching these examples in these cases.
Yeah, I talked about that story a lot in Cyber Civics, and the boys that liked football were so engaged. Like that, just they did not want to stop talking about that. It was a very impactful way to talk about this issue with children. So, well, we're getting very close to our end, and I really want to spend a little time while I have you guys. And hopefully, I noticed Brittany popped off, and Brittany, if you call back, I'll pop you back in. Oh, here she is. Bear with me a minute. But I wanted to go with each of you and see if you could just spend a few minutes with your top 3 tips for parents on how they might gain some sort of control over their children's online lives. And Janelle, I'll start with you.
Sure. And I saw a question up there a few minutes ago that I just wanted to address. And the question was I think it was something around differing households. When kids live in multiple households, how do you define, what's safe online?
Great question.
It's challenging. I mean, I am in that situation. My kids go back and forth between my house and their dad's house, and that's just a really tough thing. My best advice is you have to do the best you can to communicate with the other parent. And sometimes those situations are difficult. I get that, believe me. But I think that you have to do the best that you can of setting the right example when your kids are in your house, and that they're following your definition when they're in your house. And, as far, Diana, as the top 3 things parents can do, I think the first thing is you have to remember that you own that device. And if that child is on an iPad or a phone or a computer, that's not theirs, that's yours. And regardless of what parent bought it, when it's in your house, it's your device. And you own the ability to get on and know those passwords and know what's going on that phone. I know I talked to a mom about 2 weeks ago that quite likely, and Diana, I think I told you a little bit about this, probably saved her daughter's life through actually finding something that she found on her daughter's phone because the notifications were going wild. And as it turns out, there was a predator that had catfished her through Kik. And it was really, really scary. I think that you have to know that you own the phone. I think that you also, as a parent, need to be the one to introduce your kids to social media. I think it's good to put them off as long as you can as well. But as a parent, it's not us to train them, and to train them on whatever applications that we think are appropriate. And that's what Frenity is designed for, obviously, is to give parents a platform to train kids on the proper use of social media and to learn how to act with social media. And then, I think that also you have to teach them 2 other things. I think you have to teach them permanence. That when you put something online, it's permanent. It doesn't go away. It will come back to haunt you in public, if it's in a public space. And the biggest thing, I think, as much as that, you need to teach kids. Unfortunately, the social currency has become such that they tend to define their value based on how many followers and friends they have. And I think that's a really wrong message. And it's on us as parents to be able to show them that's not your value is not measured by how many followers you have on Twitter or Instagram. What's more important is that you know who's following you and that you don't have the wrong person following you, because it's far too easy for someone out there pretending to be someone they're not to connect with a very innocent child that's very tech savvy. So I think those are really things that parents need to be on top of too, understanding the permanence and
good points.
Really knowing who their kids are friending and following.
Great points, Janelle. And Brittany, what are your 3 top tips for parents to help them gain some control over their children's online lives?
My first one would have to be to actually activate the parental controls. There's a lot of devices and apps that actually have built-in controls. And I think just taking time to actually set those up before you hand those devices to children, it's generally easy, and I think it's so important. So that would be my first one. My second thing would be is to ask questions and be involved with what your children are doing. Sit down with them and have them pull out that device and show you what apps they're using, and let them explain to you what it is they're doing while they're online. I think, and we probably all realize this, kids are super smart, so they can actually educate us on what's going online. And if you happen to see a concern, you can jump in and help them out. So, and then the last thing I would have to say is to actually set up a plan to monitor those devices. And like Janelle said, those devices, if they're under your house, they're easily to give to you. They're just as easy to take back. And so if you have that plan in place that you're actually going to sit down with your child and review things, if the rules are set and they don't follow the rules, then you just can take it away as easy as they give it to them. But there needs to be that expectation before things get out of control. Those are my 3.
Great three. And how about you, Melissa? In your view, what are the three top things parents can do?
Well, I think focusing on the issue of catfishing, I think what they can do is make sure their teens are aware that not everyone they interact with online is always who they say they are. And there's a few things that might tip you off to that. So one might be if the identity is someone that looks new, they don't have a lot of friends, they don't have a lot of tags, and something just seems off in their social profile. Another tip to look out for is if the person says that they live in a certain place, but they're never available to meet. They always have an excuse or a reason. That's another red flag. And then finally, if the person says they're in a certain time zone, but their posts always are coming at a time that doesn't seem to correspond with that, that's another red flag that maybe things are not what they seem. So just keep an eye out, talk to your children about these warning signs and make sure they're aware.
Those are great tips. And I just want to say one thing to Brittany's point. I think probably one of the best tips I heard was set the parental controls on every device. And parents ask me all the time, how do I do it? It's so overwhelming. And I just wanted to say on cyberwise.org, we have such great information for parents, videos, ebooks, everything. You should be able to find almost anything you need to know there. But in addition, and this is what I tell everybody, if you ever want to know anything, go to YouTube and type in how to and whatever you want to know, and you will in 30 seconds have videos that will answer any question you could ever have. So that would be my number one tip. And I know our time's about out, but I did want to answer this one question that I see a friction in viewpoints between parents, educators, administrators, industry, and students, all a different frame of reference. And David, you're absolutely right. Everyone has a different frame of reference, but I think we can all agree that we all have to do something. And so that's why I'm so grateful to you three here today, because I know you three really care, and you all have done something very important to move this conversation forward. So thank you for that. And I hope this is an inspiration to anybody who happened to catch us today, that, doing nothing's not an option anymore. We have to work harder and together to make sure our kids learn digital citizenship, that they're protected online, and that they know that we have their backs in the online world. So thank you so much for being our guest today, all three of you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you to anyone that tapped in today, and this will be online on the CyberWise website by tomorrow. So thanks, you guys.
Thanks, you guys.
I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye.